My sister gave my husband a watch for his birthday. I didn't feel joy. The moment I saw it, my face went pale. "Don't touch it," I said. "What? Why not?" he asked. "Please, just don't touch it," I whispered. "It's a trap." And I was right. By the next morning, we were shaken by the scale of the scheme. My sister and parents wanted to apologize, but it was far too late for forgiveness. But before I continue the story, where are you watching this from? Leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so I can tell you the whole truth. My name is Amelia, 32 years old, living in Chicago, co-founder of Mitchell Construction alongside my husband, Jack, the man I met during our final year studying civil engineering. We started from nothing. In the early days, we worked as contracted engineers, scraping together every penny to eventually build our first office out of a repurposed container. Every brick, every steel beam, every initial contract bore our sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. You could say this company is the brainchild we raised together. Things gradually stabilized, projects increased, the team grew, and I felt truly lucky. Until one day, a birthday gift threw my entire life into a whirlwind I never anticipated. It was Jack's 34th birthday. At the small party held at home, my younger sister, Bella, walked in with a luxuriously wrapped box. I assumed it was a typical accessory or tie, but when Jack opened it, the room fell silent. It was a Patek Philippe watch, worth nearly half the value of a mid-range condo, a luxury so extravagant that even I, the company's co-founder, had never dared to dream of owning one. Jack responded with courtesy, thanked Bella, and asked if it was a family group gift, but my sister only smiled vaguely, offering no clear answer. I was stunned. Because I knew for certain, Bella did not have the financial means for that. Over the years, she had failed in at least 3 startup ventures, from handmade cosmetics to organic coffee. I clearly remember one dinner at our parents' house when my father suddenly asked, "Is your company short on material assessors?" I remember Bella studied exactly that. "She's trying to get back on track. Maybe you could give her a chance?" At the time, I didn't think too much. In truth, the company did need someone to inspect material files and quotations, and I believed that with a clear process in place, anyone would have to follow protocol. I agreed to a 6-month trial, and now that single nod has brought me here, full of unanswered questions. Because this isn't just about money. There's something deeper, something that chills me every time Bella asks Jack about project timelines, material lists, or contractor meeting schedules. I dare not entertain the idea that my sister has feelings for my husband, but the instinct of a woman, and a co-founder, won't let me look away. I told Rachel, my best friend, also a lawyer, and she said just one thing. If that gift wasn't meant to seduce, then it was definitely meant to buy someone off. From that day, I began investigating quietly. I started with the simplest thing, the watch. There was no receipt in the box, no warranty card, and Bella never mentioned where she bought it. But just a few searches revealed it belonged to the Grand Complications series, globally limited, with a listed price of $88,000, possibly more depending on the seller. I tried to check Bella's banking history, not directly, but through a project cost statement she had internally submitted to the procurement department. A personal transfer appeared, unrelated to company finances but suspicious, a payment from a company named Western Materials LLC, equal in value to the watch. A sinking feeling hit my chest. I knew Western Materials, or more accurately, I remembered it had just been added to our list of official suppliers 2 weeks ago. Immediately, I accessed the internal management system. In the list of material suppliers evaluated by Bella, Western Materials was ranked first. Good pricing, fast delivery, previously partnered on major projects in Phoenix. But when I cross-checked, there was no evidence backing any of those claims. No capability profile, no construction photos, no technical breakdowns, only a basic quotation, attached with a contact name: Thomas Grady. That name stopped me in my tracks. I had heard my father mention it a few times. "Thomas swings a driver better than Harlan," he once said while talking golf. I pulled up Thomas's LinkedIn page. Sure enough, he was the business development director of Western Materials. Cover photo: a golf course in Scottsdale. The connection began forming. Bella was the one who assessed and presented the supplier report. Western Materials sent her money, and in return, gained priority in a steel supply contract. And the representative, Thomas, was my father's golfing buddy. I still lacked concrete evidence, but the links were tightening. As for Jack, when I told him, he wasn't entirely convinced, but he was cautious enough to request an independent test of the steel batch from Western. 3 days later, the results left us speechless. Most of the samples failed structural standards. The carbon content in the steel was too low. The elasticity did not meet technical standards for multi-story residential construction. But what made Jack leap from his seat wasn't the test results. It was the final line in the report. "This batch of material has already been delivered to the Harmony Heights site, a residential project scheduled to begin foundation work next week. If we hadn't caught it in time, hundreds of future residents would be living in a building resting on rotted steel, and my company's name would forever be tied to a scandal beyond redemption." On the very night we received the test results, Jack immediately ordered the construction team to halt all operations at the Harmony Heights site. An emergency meeting was held the next morning at the company office. I sat beside him in the conference room, facing the procurement, technical, and site supervision departments. Jack began in a deep, firm voice. "We've purchased substandard steel, and it was about to be used in a high-rise residential project." No one dared speak. I looked across at Bella. My sister sat there with a file in her hands. Her face remained expressionless, as if she had nothing to do with any of it. When I requested a full review of the supplier selection process for Western Materials, Bella calmly presented the documents: quotations, capability assessments, delivery descriptions, all seemingly legitimate. But I knew very well, none of it had been independently verified. These documents had been prepped, possibly manipulated. I asked the IT department to extract the history of internal document transmissions, and from that, uncovered an email Bella had sent to the evaluation team. "Western Materials is a supplier that's worked on Phoenix projects. My dad has known Thomas for years. He's very reputable. I guarantee the batch meets standards." I printed that email and placed it in front of Jack. At that moment, he could no longer remain silent. "Who is Thomas?" he asked. I answered for Bella in a quiet but firm voice. "Business director at Western Materials. And also my father's close friend, Ronald." Silence engulfed the room. Jack sighed, turning to Bella. "Did you receive any money from Western Materials?" She hesitated for a second, then shook her head. But I had already prepared the transaction statement in the internal report. An $88,000 transfer from Western Materials to Bella's personal account, exactly 1 week before the contract was signed. When I handed her that paper, her hand trembled, and when I asked, "What was this payment for, Bella?" she could no longer respond. Everything was now clear. She had accepted money to embed a supplier into our company's system, a supplier personally connected to our family. And this wasn't just fraud. It was betrayal. A betrayal of the company Jack and I had painstakingly built. A betrayal of the trust I had once placed in my only sister. But I knew this was only the surface. What I needed now was to go deeper, to uncover every link in the hidden handshake behind it all. Because I was beginning to feel it with absolute certainty. Bella did not act alone. There was someone behind her, someone once very close to me, whom I must confront in the coming truth. I didn't go home after the meeting. Instead, I drove straight to my parents' house. The air in the car was thick, as if every thought in my head were burning. I needed confirmation, not just to accuse, but to know whether I could still trust anything that once meant family. When I arrived, my father, Ronald, was trimming the hedges in the backyard. He looked lighthearted, carefree, as if the world held no weight. I stepped out, standing a few paces from him. "Do you remember Thomas Grady?" I asked. He looked up, slightly surprised, then nodded. "Of course. Thomas is a good man. Been my golf buddy for nearly a decade." I clenched my fists. He's now the business development director at Western Materials, and he's the one who transferred money to Bella. The space between us grew oppressively silent. My father set down the shears, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice lower, no longer gentle. I didn't beat around the bush. "I know everything. From the fabricated assessments to Bella's internal emails. You knew him, you introduced him to Bella, and now our company nearly built an entire project with substandard steel." He stared at me, and there was no surprise in his eyes, only weariness. "Bella needed a chance, and Thomas just wanted to help. It's just a steel contract. No one got hurt." I almost laughed through my disbelief. No one got hurt? What if we hadn't tested it? Who would be accountable if that building collapsed? "Dad, this isn't about helping family anymore. This is fraud, corruption. You nearly dragged the entire company into a pit." He turned away, his voice fading but sharp. "You never understood what it means to protect your own. Everything always has to be right. So right you kill all family ties." I stood frozen. I had known he favored Bella, but I never imagined he would be the one behind it, enabling, covering up, and worse, justifying it in the name of family. Memories resurfaced. I was 9, preparing for the spring recital at elementary school, when the blue princess dress my mother rented for me was shredded with scissors, by Bella, who was only 6. I had burst into tears, but Dad just patted her head and said, "She's just a child. Forgive her." When I was 15, Bella secretly used my laptop for a school presentation and accidentally spilled a can of Coke on the keyboard. The laptop was ruined, and my mother simply sighed. "It was old anyway. Get a new one. Your sister needs the grade." I had learned to be quiet, to yield, because I didn't want to be called selfish. But I was wrong to think growing up would change anything. That evening, I returned home and reopened the system emails. In a recently deleted folder, I found the exchange between Bella and Thomas Grady, sent through the company's secondary email server. In it, Bella wrote, "I adjusted the evaluation to push Western to the top. Mitchell's system relies heavily on metrics. If Thomas needs anything else from my dad, I'll let him know." And Thomas's reply, "Tell Ronald not to worry. Everything's moving in the right direction." I sat there for a long time. No more rage. No more pain. Just a cold emptiness, like shattered glass. They hadn't just conspired to manipulate the company. They believed I would never fight back. That I would stay silent, like I had so many times before. But they were wrong. This time, I would not hide. I would not protect. I would not forgive. And I knew I would pay a price. But I also knew, if I didn't do what was right now, everything Jack and I built would be tainted by the very people I once called my own. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. No coffee needed, no deep breaths, only clarity, like a window finally wiped clean after years of grime. I went into the office, opened my laptop, and typed the first official letter to the entire executive board. A notice to immediately suspend all dealings with Western Materials, conduct a full audit of materials from this supplier across all current sites, and instructed the legal team to draft a unilateral termination of the contract due to serious quality violations. I knew this would bring legal consequences, but I'd rather face the courts than be buried by silence. Jack joined the emergency meeting that followed. He took charge of technical operations and protected our engineering team. I handled external affairs and finance, Everyone knew what was happening, but no one dared name it, until I placed the official notice in front of Bella. She stared at the paper, her hand trembling. "What is this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "A termination notice," I said flatly, "for fraud, conflict of interest, and severely damaging the company's reputation." Bella froze for a few seconds. Then, as if everything crumbled, she shot up from her chair and shouted, "You'd throw me out for the company?" I kept my gaze steady. "You threw yourself out." Jack moved to intervene, but I signaled him to stop. Bella glared at me, her voice rising. "Mom and Dad were right. You're heartless, always acting like you're better than everyone." I didn't respond. In that moment, I didn't see a 28-year-old woman. I saw a child who never learned consequences. That afternoon, I got a call from Mom. I didn't even get a word in before she said, "Your sister made a mistake. Can't you forgive her? You're both girls. How could you take it this far?" Her voice was laced with reproach. Then, my father came on speaker. "If you take this to court, don't blame us for no longer being a family." I stood at my office window, watching Chicago fade into late autumn gold. I replied, softly but firmly, "You can choose silence." "I can't." I hung up before they could answer. That very night, I forwarded the case files to our lawyer. And for the first time in my life, I accepted that some bonds, even bound by blood, can become poison if you don't cut them loose. I had no other choice. And I no longer needed one. 3 days after Bella's termination, I received over 40 missed calls in a single morning, from my mother, from my father, from Aunt Gloria, from a relative I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The messages flooded in, all circling one theme. "You're destroying the family's honor." Some accused me of playing a double-edged sword, some called me an ungrateful woman, and one, even more painful, sent an old photo of Bella and me as children, captioned, "How could sisters turn so cold?" I had prepared to be misunderstood, but I hadn't prepared for how quickly those who once embraced me during my stumbles could turn their backs. And then, what I feared happened. An anonymous blog titled "Inside Mitchell" suddenly appeared. In it were posts accusing Mitchell Construction of swapping cheap materials for profit, colluding with incompetent contractors, and worst of all, implying I was a hypocrite for firing a family member to protect my position. Every sentence felt like a needle piercing the reputation I had spent 10 years building. Some partners, though not issuing official statements, began pulling back bids. A financial group requested a pause on funding for our expansion project. The financial pressure started closing in, not from actual wrongdoing, but from well-timed lies spun with precision. Jack slammed his hand on the table. For the first time since we married, I saw him that furious. "They're playing dirty. Do you want to sue them one by one?" he asked. I shook my head. We don't fight rumors with blades. We counter them with truth." I believed in one principle: don't use knives to fight rumors, use light. But inside I still trembled, because I knew the blog wasn't just slander, it was a blade, driven by those who shared the Mitchell name, who carried my blood. While I was trying to keep the company standing, they were quietly breaking each support beneath me. And the worst part, they weren't hiding. A secondary account in our project management system was found downloading procurement cost reports, later deactivated that same night. The user who logged in? Bella. Despite being fired, she still tried to sabotage us. Jack looked at me, his expression asking, "Can we still forgive this?" I didn't answer. I only looked down at my hands, the same hands that once held my little sister's when she was learning to walk, and now, only cold emptiness remained. I knew I had crossed the point of no return. From here on, I would either stand firm or be drowned by my own blood. That morning, I put on the gray blazer I'd reserved for special occasions, but this wasn't for a contract negotiation or a partnership signing. I stood before a row of microphones at an unscheduled press conference with the Mitchell Construction logo behind me. Cameras were ready. More journalists showed up than I expected. I didn't avoid. I looked straight into the lens and began recounting everything, from discovering the substandard steel batch to our internal investigation, and finally, the evidence that a staff member, related to me, had accepted money from an unqualified partner to manipulate bidding documents. I kept it brief, but left out no critical detail. In my hands were documents stamped by our legal department. I didn't use flowery words. I didn't shed a tear. I spoke only truth, the only thing that stands when everything else falls. After my statement, I handed the press copies of the evidence. Emails between Bella and Thomas Grady, the transfer record from Western Materials, independent test results, and internal meeting minutes. A reporter raised his hand, asking, "Are you sure these weren't edited to protect your personal image?" I looked straight at him. No. Reputation doesn't save a building when it collapses, but transparency can. That very afternoon, I submitted the full case file to the state prosecutor and the Department of Building Regulation. I knew I had just burned the last bridge connecting me to my family. But I had no other choice. The police summoned Bella the next day. At first, she refused to cooperate. But text messages recovered from her phone, including promises from Thomas Grady like, "You'll get more if you land another project," left no room for denial. Simultaneously, a broader investigation began targeting Western Materials, and my father's name, Ronald, surfaced in financial records. They found an account under his old transport company, receiving at least 3 thank you commissions from Western, each over $25,000. At the time the steel contracts were approved. With that money, he bought a retirement condo in Phoenix, the one he used to say was self-saved retirement funds. I sat in my office, watching headlines spread across social media. Mitchell Family Company confronts internal corruption. Whistleblower is Ronald Mitchell's own daughter. And I knew, from that moment on, I was no longer a daughter in their eyes. I was a witness against my own blood. But I felt no regret, because if I had stayed silent, I would have been complicit. And now, I am the survivor. The first month after the press conference passed like a strange dream. Every morning I woke up on time, made coffee, sat down at my desk, but no longer received a single morning text from family, no more calls from my mother asking, "Will you be home for dinner?" And no more weekend gatherings I once considered part of life. And strangely, I didn't feel the lack. There was no longer a heaviness walking into meetings, no more silent scrutiny every time I made a decision. Mitchell Construction didn't collapse as the rumors had threatened. On the contrary, when the matter was clarified and the media acknowledged how we handled it, many partners returned. This time, with deeper respect. The investigation officially announced Bella was sentenced to 36 months in prison for conspiracy, commercial fraud, and bribery. Thomas Grady, once my father's close friend, was banned from working in construction for 10 years. And my parents, Ronald and Joan, were not jailed, but were placed under 18 months probation for complicity and failing to declare illicit income. The Phoenix apartment was seized. I didn't attend the trial. Not out of fear, but because I knew that if I did, they'd think I came to witness their downfall. But I didn't need that. I just needed the truth to come out. And it did. Before the law. Before society. And most importantly, before my own conscience. One afternoon, I stood on the rooftop of a new project, the first to break ground after the crisis. The late-day sunlight bathed the fresh steel beams, gleaming as if untouched by past harm. Jack came up beside me in silence. We said nothing, but I felt what had never changed. A partner, a soulmate, and a trust that blood alone can't buy. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. No dreams, no waking up in panic at a ringing phone, because I knew, though I had lost what I once called family, I had preserved something greater, principle, dignity, and a belief in what's right. Not easy, not flawless, but freedom and a new beginning. After the trial ended, I spent 3 weeks rewriting our entire supplier assessment and control process, not because I no longer trusted others, but because I wanted to trust the right way. Mitchell Construction used to be a construction company. Now, it needed to be a company built on transparency. Jack and I implemented a new system. Any personal connection between staff and external partners must be openly declared, even distant relatives or old classmates. Human Resources was restructured with a dedicated team to monitor potential conflicts of interest. We brought in an organizational psychologist to lead internal ethics training to help everyone understand that professional integrity isn't theoretical. It's the only thing that protects a company from collapse. In the early weeks, the atmosphere remained cautious. Some avoided speaking to me. Others were overly careful, as if a single misstep would be labeled betrayal. I understood. Trust isn't rebuilt with apologies. It needs time and action. I started inviting small teams to lunch, openly sharing what had happened. No sugarcoating, no blame. I spoke about Bella, my parents, the slanderous blog, and my sleepless nights. Not to seek sympathy, but so people would know I am human too, hurt before and still learning how to move forward. One day on site, a young engineer named Malik, once an intern, ran up to hand me notes on how to optimize a foundation design. I asked why he hadn't emailed the design team. Malik whispered, "I just wanted to make sure you still wanted to hear from us." I smiled, a genuine one, and I knew I was rebuilding the most important thing: trust from within. As for family, I no longer stayed in touch with my parents. Bella was still serving her sentence. Occasionally, I'd unlock my phone to find messages from distant relatives. "Are you doing okay?" Or, "Have you thought about forgiveness?" I never replied. Forgiveness isn't a sentence. Forgiveness is when I look at the past without letting it define the present. I don't hate them. I just no longer need them in my path forward. One Monday morning, I placed an old photo on my desk. Jack and me on the day we opened our first office, both in dusty shirts, grinning wide in front of the Mitchell Construction sign. I stared at it for a long time. Because, among all the things I had to walk away from, this is what I chose to keep. Not because of blood, but because it was built on truth, trust, and brave choices. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost until there were no more calls asking, "Did you transfer the money yet?" Or, "Your sister needs some help, could you?" In those first days after the fallout, I floated through an invisible space, where silence itself felt foreign. No one needed anything from me. No one assumed I had to sacrifice. And in that emptiness, I began to see myself. Not as a founder, not as the eldest daughter, not as the accommodating sister, but simply as Amelia, a 32-year-old woman who had grown too used to living in response, someone who once believed love always came with responsibility, and that forgiveness was an obligation if you wanted to keep the bloodline intact. For the first time in years, I returned to an evening art class, something I once loved in college but had abandoned for being too busy. I rented a small attic room near Lake Michigan, where I spent Sundays reading, journaling, or just watching the sunlight glimmer on the water. No output required, no results expected, no one waiting, no one pressing. And in those quiet afternoons, I gradually forgave, not others, but myself, for staying silent too long, for shrinking to fit in, for stifling emotions to keep peace in a family I no longer belonged to. One day, while walking along the lakefront, I received an email from someone unexpected. A woman named Lauren, a former employee fired for reporting her manager's kickbacks. She wrote, "I've followed your journey. I know you've had to give up a lot. I just want you to know, you're not alone." I sat down on a bench, opened my laptop, and replied, "Thank you for reminding me that some people still believe in what's right." I don't know where that email will lead, but in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Genuine connection, not for gain, not for status, but for shared values. On some late afternoons, I still vaguely recall family dinners, my mother's laughter, my father's eyes when he talked about golf swings. But memories no longer hold me. They just pass, like clouds drifting over the lake. And I understand, the deepest pain isn't betrayal. It's taking too long to realize I deserve decency. But I also understand, the moment I dared to speak the truth, I came home. Not to the old house, but to myself. On the day of Mitchell Construction's new office opening, it rained lightly, not a storm, not a downpour, just enough to darken the pavement and make the red maple leaves land with soft sounds. It was a 2-story glass and steel building on the northern edge of Chicago, not too big, but just right for this new chapter. I stood under the awning, watching my colleagues arrive one by one, carrying coffee, project layouts, and smiles I thought I'd never see again. In the reception corner hung a painting I'd made, framed in an old oak border, an abstract image of steel beams interlacing against a charcoal gray background with a pale yellow circle at the center, like a quiet light in the ruins. I didn't sign it. No need for anyone to know it was mine. I didn't need recognition anymore. I just wanted to leave something honest, where status, titles, and mistaken notions of kinship once overshadowed truth. Midway through the ceremony, Jack came over and placed a small box in my hand. I opened it. Inside was a simple silver necklace, bearing a slender steel bar, hand-welded. He said, "I kept it from the first steel batch we used 10 years ago, back when we worked that site in Joliet." I nearly cried, not because of its value, but because he remembered and understood. What kept me here wasn't money or titles, it was truth. The things that can't be bought, erased, or twisted. I put on the necklace, said nothing, but inside I knew. It was a symbol of myself. Solid, cold, straight, and unbending under pressure. That evening, after all the guests had left, I climbed to the rooftop alone. From there, I saw the gray-blue of Lake Michigan below, rooftops stretching into the distance, and a lone bird tilting toward the setting sun. I closed my eyes, letting the wind sweep through my hair, my fingers, and whispered to myself, "Amelia, from now on, you don't have to prove anything. Just live truthfully, because sometimes revenge isn't making others fall, but rising, steady and unshaken, not burdened by injustice, but tempered by it." And if someone out there is watching this story, from somewhere far away, I just want you to remember one thing. Truth, no matter how long it's buried, finds a way to rise, like a sprout through concrete. And when you choose what's right, you are never wrong. I know, not everyone will understand why I did it, why I dared to call out my own sister, why I stood up to my parents, the ones who carried me on my first day of school. Some call me cold. Some say I betrayed my blood. But if you've ever lived in a house where silence meant approval, where you had to swallow your tears to keep the peace, where kindness was mined like obligation, maybe you'll understand. I didn't do it out of anger. I didn't want anyone in prison. I just couldn't keep turning away from wrongdoing, just because it came from people I once loved. There was a price to that choice. I lost my family. But I found myself. And I learned something, that not everyone who shares your name will stand by you when storms hit. But in those moments when you think you've lost everything, people without shared blood will reach out. I spent my youth trying to please those who never truly saw me. But for the rest of my life, I'll live for truth, for values, and for those brave enough to do what's right, even if it means standing alone. Thank you for staying with me till the end of this story. If you've ever stood between right and wrong, between truth and false peace, tell me where you're watching from and what this story made you think about. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because somewhere out there, someone might need to know. They're not alone when choosing the honest path. And I hope you always choose what's right, even if it costs you, because you're worth it.